So welcome to Health Challenge Delaware, and get your index card ready because we're going to build another action plan this week. This is week 3 of Health Challenge Delaware here in 2021, our 3rd annual. Welcome to everybody who's joining. Reminder that I sent out a survey. This is like our weekly survey. I'm hoping folks could keep filling it out. I am learning a whole lot about what you are undertaking and what is your barriers and what is your success level and your comments and your This week is nutrition myths and nutrition facts. Week 3, here we are, week 3 of the 4-week of Health Challenge Delaware in the month of October. Today we're going to have the famous Colleen Montgomery, our health and wellness coach and mentor here, share a little bit of her experience as a professional in this field. We're going to move to my presentation on nutrition myths and facts. We'll have a little time for Q&A, and then we'll go to our breakout rooms for a good half hour to hopefully build your action plan, also to tell the story of what's been happening, what's working, what's not working, what are your challenges, what are your successes and victories. We want to celebrate those victories. We want to hear about them. And then we'll regroup at the end, the last 5 or 10 minutes, for final questions. And reminder is that behavior change is very hard. So I've said these words before. I didn't tell you that, well, it takes very roughly 90 days to form a habit. It actually varies a whole lot by person and by habit, but it takes time. And some of it's just putting in the work, and it eventually becomes second nature. And watch out for those old habits wanting to creep in. Your inner psyche is going to try to find every excuse in the book to have them come back. So we want to lock in some of those healthy behaviors. Reminder on safety: if you are taking medicine for diabetes or hypertension, high blood pressure, and you suddenly make these healthy behavioral changes, diet changes, exercise changes, you actually can drop your blood pressure too low. This really does happen. You can drop your blood sugar too low and really run into trouble. And with that, we have none other than Colleen Montgomery here to share. Are you here, Colleen? Unmuted, I hope. Maybe not just yet. Apologies. We will have Colleen join at the end.
Oh.
Colleen, you here?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I was trying to unmute and it wouldn't let me, but I'm good now.
No.
I believe.
There you are.
Thank you for letting me talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talk for a couple minutes. I'm Colleen Montgomery. I'm a clinical exercise physiologist and certified plant-based health coach. And this is my 3rd year mentoring. I believe I've been doing it from the start, and I love this event so much. And just a bit about me. My background is in cardiac rehab. I actually still work in cardiac rehab a little bit, but I've been doing that for about 12 years. Which is, if you're not familiar, it's kind of like physical therapy for people with heart disease. And I love it, and it's very rewarding. But just over the years, I started to learn more about plant-based eating and how that is, as we know, way superior to what we were teaching in cardiac rehab, the so-called heart healthy American Heart Association diet, which of course is a step in the right direction. But now we all know better that there's an even more powerful way to eat to care for our heart and overall health. So I started to, change my dialogue with my patients. And one of, I love telling this story. One of probably the most pivotal moment of my career was when I had a patient who was young. He was, I think, in his mid 40s or late 40s. And he was cardiac wise pretty much a mess. He had unrelenting chest pain, and he had ongoing shortness of breath at very low intensity exercise and cardiac rehab. He was seeing his doctors every single week, and they were tweaking his medications, and they just couldn't figure out why he was continuing to have symptoms and why his multiple heart procedures were not working. So we talked extensively about plant-based eating, and then I think a couple months went by. I didn't see him for a little bit, and I ran into him again, and it was amazing. It was like looking at a different person. He was dripping sweat because he had just finished a workout, and he was like glowing. He was like, I did it. I am symptom free. I am mostly plant-based. And he said, I got rid of my symptoms and I feel amazing. And prior to that, he was exercising. We had people in our program that were 30 years his senior that were exercising significantly harder than him. So it was great to see him dripping sweat with the towel around his neck, and really had come a long, long way. And I strongly believe he avoided open heart surgery and a slew of other, heart related complications down the road. So he had a lot to do with me starting a health coaching business and focusing specifically on heart health, to combine, that best information that we all have now, that plant-based eating, that very, very powerful way of eating, combined with, some of the things Dave just said, the really effective and powerful behavior change techniques, because we can tell people what to do, but we know that doesn't really work that well. But when you do the goal setting and the brainstorming around, overcoming barriers and things like that, and adopting those types of behavioral change techniques, you can really come a long way. That's why this event is so powerful, because you get to meet, you're held accountable. We follow up with you on your goals, and it can make a huge difference. So that's why I'm here, and happy all of you are here. And hopefully that story, if you have some sort of cardiac history or any risk factors related to it, hopefully that gives you a little boost of motivation that, some dietary changes can go a really, really long way. So that's my story.
Bravo. And thanks for mentoring this 3 years. It's hard to believe you've joined us all 3 years. You've been such, and I know we've had a number of folks, super talented mentors who have joined us all 3 years. So grateful to you guys. Anybody have any questions for Colleen while she has the floor?
I'm sorry, is there a way that people can get in touch with Colleen if they want to know about her services?
Sure. Yeah. You know what? I'll just put a couple of things in the chat if anyone happens to that has any questions or anything. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks,
Great.
Mike.
And we also have Annie Murphy, who's also a health and wellness coach. So her services are available as well. And she's one of our mentors. Let's see, I want to make sure I have all our mentors, by the way. I'm creating the rooms now. We have Chirac, LC, Ruben, Michelle, Michael, Suzanne, Annie, Bernice, Centea, Judy, Kathy, Colleen. Who did I miss? Did I miss somebody?
Bruce, if you need him.
Bruce.
I don't think you have Natalie. I didn't hear Natalie. Or yeah.
Let me
Or
add
Kathy Weaver.
I got Kathy.
All
right. Let's start with these. Bruce, you weren't here last week, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, we were traveling.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to go with these 13 for now, since everybody was kind of in a room last week. I'm going to resume our presentation, so I have until about 7:15. So thank you, Colleen. I know there's so many more tales you could tell about ministering to the sick in a cardiac rehab setting.
Yeah. And I don't think I'm the only one in here with a cardiac rehab background.
Ah, that's right, Bernice.
Bernice, right. I thought
Famous Bernice. We have, I'm telling you, it's ridiculous the amount of talent we have here. This is the thing that makes me so proud about Health Challenge Delaware, is being able to surface some of this talent that's sitting out there waiting for people like you to come join and learn. So nutrition myths and facts. Myth number one, we're just going to kind of run through about 20 of these things. Some of them are going to be super quick because we don't have time to go too deep. And you'll be glad I'm not going to go too deep into the biochemical justification of this one. But for years, we thought type 2 diabetes is caused by too much sugar. And we have learned really in the last 10 years or so that it's probably not the underlying cause. And the underlying cause is probably too much fat. Actually, saturated fat in particular causes that so-called insulin resistance inside the cells of the liver and the muscle. And when you get that insulin resistance, that's when you manifest the symptom of diabetes, the symptom of insulin resistance, which means you eat carbohydrate-rich diet like sugary something, and your blood sugar will spike. That's the symptom of diabetes. It's very much the cause of a lot of the damage done from diabetes. But if you want to reverse the underlying cause of type 2 diabetes, it's to a large extent avoid some of these harmful saturated fats, especially a black star goes on palmitate, which is a really, and that's basically palm oil, as you might expect, but it's in a lot of other things, including animal fats. But avoiding saturated fats in general is a good strategy. And it's unfortunate because saturated fat is everywhere in the American diet. So beware of saturated fat. Even if you're eating vegan, you can eat a lot of saturated fat if you're eating processed things that have palm oil, coconut oil, and some other tropical oils. Myth number two is that protein should be emphasized before all other nutrients. We hear a lot about protein. Oh, you're eating plant-based. Well, where do you get your protein? Has anybody heard that one before? And I would argue that you're good with the plant-based food. So it turns out, and here's a Gregor video. I shared a few of them in the email message I sent out, but I was thinking of skipping this to make sure that we have time. So I will send this out in the email that I send out after this presentation, so you can watch this on your own time. It just reviews some of the science around protein. There's a great book called Proteinaholic, which I highly recommend. But to summarize the points in the video, one is that there's essentially no such thing as protein deficiency. You would think if protein is so vital, so important, then there would be this thing called protein deficiency. And when you search on all the research that's been published, you would find study after study and case report after case report talking about this patient who had protein deficiency, that patient who had protein deficiency. And what we found is that it essentially doesn't exist. So as long as you're getting calories, you're getting enough protein. Basically, if you're eating food, you're getting enough protein. There is almost no such thing as a protein deficiency. Are there certain populations who would benefit from a little bit more? Absolutely, yes. This table here is for adults. Adults, the protein is really the scaffolding, the stuff that sort of builds the structure of an animal. And we've already built our structure. We don't want to grow anymore. We're grown up. But as you might guess, younger people, especially young adolescents, can require 50% more protein than is pictured here. But a typical 140-pound person needs about 50 grams a day of protein. So a rule of thumb is take your weight in pounds, divide by 3. Roughly a third of your weight is the amount of grams of protein you need a day to be your best. And most of us get way more than that. So protein is kind of everywhere. There's protein in bread and protein in all sorts of stuff. But that's a whole nother topic, and I'll share you that video. And I highly recommend that book, Proteinaholic. It's actually very good. The title makes it sound goofy, but it's a very well-researched book. And I have to say that I actually went to medical school with the author, Dr. Garth Davis. He was a year ahead of me at Baylor College of Medicine. He was in Dr. Jayshree Taylor's class, for those of you who know Dr. Taylor at Progressive Health of Delaware. Myth number 3, you have to eat vegan to be healthy. I think a shining example of that is the blue zones. These are the places in the world where people live to be 100 at 10 times the rate that we do in the United States. And these folks, what do they eat? They eat mostly plant-based, but they're not vegan. They'll have meat as celebratory things, and it's all good. These guys have wonderful lives. They are vanishing because KFC has been moving in, and McDonald's and Burger King. But for those who still indulge in the traditional lifestyle, there's a little bit more flourishing. And of course, you need to look no further than the center part of your grocery store to find plenty of examples of unhealthy vegan food. So we don't tend to, in lifestyle medicine, emphasize the word vegan or encourage a vegan behavior pattern. It can definitely be part of a healthier lifestyle, being vegan, but really we prefer less processed and ideally that whole food plant-based diet. Myth number 4, humans need to drink cow milk at certain ages for calcium. Some would argue you need to eat, have cow milk your whole life. But there's plenty of plant-based sources of calcium. So probably chief would be soy milk and tofu. So soy tends to be rich in calcium, but it's in spinach, it's in lots of other beans, it's in seeds like tahini, sesame seeds, and the list goes on. So there's calcium all over the place. You're going to get a good amount of calcium if you emphasize beans and greens in your diet. And for that matter, and like this Buddha bowl, for example, is rich in calcium. It is rich in protein. It's rich in fiber. Eat this thing. Imagine eating this bowl, how good you're going to feel after you finish this bowl off. You're going to feel full. You're going to feel like $1 million, right? So that just gives you a sense. You can tell often by just looking at the food how you're going to feel. But on to the next myth, which I actually can't read the top of my screen. 5, thank you. We need dairy to prevent osteoporosis. So on this topic of calcium, there's the theory that we better get our dairy or else we're going to get our osteoporosis. But it turns out there's a very strong correlation between the amount of dairy that a country eats and the amount of osteoporosis and bone fractures that they get. I mean, look at that correlation coefficient of 0.851. I know you guys are all just looking at that in a state of shock, but that means it's almost like a 1-to-1 would mean it's completely correlated, right? Anyway, I'm sure I'm screwing up my statistics. I'm not a statistician, but look at that line. It matches the countries. Each dot is a country. And so for what that's worth, so this is not a randomized placebo-controlled trial, but you add this evidence to a lot of the other evidence that's out there, and you really have to conclude there might well be something to it. And there's reasons to believe that dairy would actually do the opposite of what we want for the bones. For one thing, it's acid forming, and acid is what we think dissolves the bone material. There's plenty of research out there that really questions whether it's commonly called milk, but I call it bovine breast milk because that's what it is. It is the lactate secretions of a large mammal that is not a human being. And for that matter, why are we suckling the milk well after weaning? So human beings until just a few thousand years ago never did this. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It makes sense if you're starving to death in the wintertime in Northern Europe, where there's not a lot of other food, and that's where it was done, and that's where it helps populations survive a winter. But it's not necessary. By no means are we well adapted to this. The saturated fat that's in there. It depends on the study. You can look at different studies about dairy and draw very different conclusions. I think there's enough to really question the safety of dairy. There's a pretty strong correlation between breast cancer risk and dairy consumption, but prostate cancer as well, heart disease, especially when you're consuming the dairy fat, which is rich in saturated fat. So most adults worldwide are intolerant of milk. So going dairy free is a very legitimate strategy, and you could certainly add that to your card this week. Is I'm going to pull the plug and go dairy free, and it's not that hard. So a lot of people think that fat is your friend. You've heard this before, especially when espousing the merits of a keto diet. It's very interesting science around the keto diet. I recommend you to the book How Not to Diet by Dr. Gregory. He has a very thorough discussion on the keto diet. One of the most it's got to be the most scientifically heavily referenced book I've ever read. He's got literally thousands. There's so many references, he doesn't even print them in the back. You have to go to his website and look them up by number, but they're there. And some fascinating science. But when you're eating high fat keto diet, number one, you've got to burn that fat that you just ate first. And the weight loss that happens is mostly water. So you're really not burning fat. If you want to burn fat, you definitely want to eat whole food, plant-based. There are some fats that may be your friend, emphasizing these omega-3 fatty acids are probably a good strategy. Not necessarily for heart health, but maybe for brain health. So you can eat, ALA is present in things like flaxseed, chia seed, hemp seed, walnuts. Some of that gets converted to EPA and some of that gets converted to DHA. And so EPA and DHA are the two that are sort of essential in humans. Are you converting enough? Are you getting enough? And so this brings me to our next myth, which I think might be a myth. Again, we're not shying away from controversy here. We're trying to be interesting, give you guys some food for discussion. But I think that there's enough evidence that if you're just using these as your source of omega-3, you might not be getting enough. And why you might not be getting enough omega-3. And why would I say that? Well, for one thing, this is my own omega-3 result. So I've gotten a couple of these over the years, and my more recent one was I was actually low on the omega check, the omega index level, which is surprising because I eat a lot of those seeds. I really avoid the processed foods. My linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 fatty acid, a less healthy marker for processed food consumption, was high. I'm going to attribute that to eating some store-bought hummus. I'm a big hummus guy, so I've been really backing off that. But I am telling you, it is hard to really emphasize these healthy fatty acids sufficiently. So also looking at some interesting research that's coming out. This came out just this summer, I believe, from analysis of the Framingham offspring cohort data. And what they found, interestingly, is that, and the headlines kind of said it all, that basically people who have low omega-3 levels have the same death rate as smokers. And that's literally what they found. If you had in the lowest 1/5 amount of omega-3 relative to a smoker, you had the same death rate. So this line is people who smoke and have low omega-3, and they die at a higher rate. So as the years go by, fewer and fewer are alive. This is going down and down. But the best was those who didn't smoke and had high omega-3, and they survive at better rate. But look at that, both the line for smoking and high omega-3 and the line for not smoking but low omega-3 are identical. So fascinating research. On the basis of that study and a little bit of other stuff, speaking to the benefits, potential benefits of omega-3 for brain health, especially the DHA, and having looked at a reference called consumerlab.com, I am going to conclude that I recommend this particular brand of omega-3. It's called Diva, and it's cheap on Amazon. And they called it out specifically from Consumer Lab because it's very, in my opinion, unbiased, independent laboratory like Consumer Reports, except analyzing particularly supplements. But they called out this particular product, the DHA. So this might be the one to take. The other reason I mentioned that.
How much would you recommend?
So Judy, as always, you and I are thinking alike. So here we are, how much omega-3 to take, just as Judy requested. And I'm going to say, they say no more than 3 grams a day, no more than 3,000 milligrams a day. Beyond that, we don't have a whole lot of guidance. You can look at this research that shows that when we are taking the 1,800 milligrams over a 5-month period, we see that omega-3 level rise. And if we take less, it's just a much slower upslope. So I think probably that's your lowest, and I would go up from there. So 1,800 to 2,500 milligrams per day of the combination of DHA and EPA. It probably matters a bit, that mix, but again, we don't have that much research. The other reason I mention this is that anecdotally, I haven't seen research to this effect, but one of the things that is almost universally low when you check it is omega-3 level. So you can get your own omega-3 checked through LabCorp, through Quest. It's not actually that expensive. So you can ask your doctor to check your omega-3 panel, okay? And they'll check your arachidonic acid, which is an unhealthy fatty acid. They'll check, they'll come up with that index number that I shared. It's a little bit of an emerging science. I'm going out there on a limb, but I'm saying I think it's good to take omega-3. Some of the research that shows that omega-3 might help with dementia is with the combination of B vitamins and omega-3 together. That combination has benefit. Of course, if you want B vitamins, if you're eating whole food plant-based, you're getting B vitamins. Okay, there it is loaded with B vitamins. Myth number 8, we are designed to eat meat. But what about the fact that we're designed to eat meat? We have incisors, right? And we're and we're just designed to eat meat, right? We're omnivores, right? And many of you have seen this slide many over and over from me, and I apologize for those of you who have already seen it, but I think it's so powerful because everybody thinks we're omnivores. We're not really omnivores. This is an omnivore. A bear is an omnivore. Your dog is an omnivore. Look at those big fangs, right? That's an omnivore. Look at the nature of that omnivorous body lines up a lot with the carnivores. They have acidic saliva, acidic urine. They have a short bowel relative to torso. They have a jaw that doesn't go laterally, so it can't grind plant material. Everything about our physiology and our anatomy lines up with the great apes. So our close cousins, the chimpanzees, the bonobos, and the gorillas. Look at the dentition, you look at the saliva, you look at the amylase in the saliva, you look at the pH, you look at the length of our bowel relative to our torso, you look at so many things, almost across the board. We are identical to them. And what do they eat? They eat, they're mostly vegan, mostly 100% vegan. Chimpanzees will rarely eat a monkey, but for the most part, these guys are almost 100% vegan. And we are designed the same way as them. So yeah, I don't think you can make a credible argument that there's something inherent in our physiology that we need to be eating meat. So let's jump to another myth. To prevent heart disease, seeing a cardiologist is all that you need. So you're gonna go see the cardiologist. They're gonna whip out their magic toolbox and they're gonna help you prevent heart disease. Well, if you see a good preventive cardiologist, that can absolutely be the case. But a lot of our whole healthcare system around heart health is oriented towards driving people towards getting stents, or at least it has been until very recently. Stents, so here's the story. You start getting chest pain, you go to the doctor, they get a stress test, they find a blockage, you go get a cath and they put a stent, they find a blockage, they see the blockage, they stent it, and they've solved the problem, right? But it turns out stents are useless. They've even done sham controlled trials, multiple of them. And what we find over and over and over is that heart stents, when done for chronic stable angina, do not save lives, do not prevent heart attacks, don't prevent the symptoms of angina, or don't prevent chest pain. Now you need a stent if you're having a heart attack. That's a whole different situation. If you're having a heart attack, a stent can save your life. The difference there is a heart attack, we know exactly where the significant lesion is, and we can fix the problem right then and there. The problem with when you have blockage in your coronary arteries is it's not just in one spot, it's everywhere, and it's almost impossible to predict where the actual heart attack is going to occur. And there's a downside to these procedures. So when you look at the tools in the toolbox of traditional allopathic medicine, the pills that we offer to help prevent our leading killer, heart disease, it's mostly the pills, and it's a little bit of procedures. But what we find is that the pills help, but not that much, especially in cases where we don't have that severe disease. I mean, if your blood pressure is 190 over 110, then you absolutely have to take that blood pressure medicine so very urgently. If your blood pressure is a very slightly elevated 130 over 80, the number needed to treat is much higher. The percent chance that that blood pressure drug you take every day for the rest of your life is actually going to benefit you is much smaller. And bottom line, most of the way we approach these chronic diseases with taking these lifelong drugs help a little. They do help a little, but we haven't done as much as we can to prevent the diseases. And what we find when we compare, in the few cases where we have sort of similar research where we can compare apples to apples, is we find that the benefits of the lifestyle change can be, when done properly, can be much more impactful, okay, and much lower risk. You're not going to run into trouble. For example, for heart disease, there's this Ornish intensive cardiac rehab program, which has dramatic benefits, and it's basically an intensive program like we're doing here today. It's lifestyle medicine, it's healthy diet, exercise, stress, and relationships. So moving on to fish. Well, fish is a whole nother topic. It's a nuanced topic, but to argue that fish are healthy for heart and brain is debatable. Here's a great video on fish. Is fish brain food? And I only have 12 minutes, so I'm going to skip this one as well, but a great little video, and I will include it in our follow-up email. So I encourage you to go watch this little 5-minute video from Dr. Greger about whether fish really is brain food, whether it's healthy for the heart or for the brain. I think a lot of the research that shows benefit for fish is what we call a substitution effect. When you see people eating a lot of fish, what would they be eating if they weren't eating the fish? That depends on the population, but oftentimes studies are done in populations where they would otherwise be eating stuff like red meat or chicken, and we do see a little bit of lower heart attack rate. But when you actually compare with a group of people who are eating whole food plant-based, you see dramatic reductions in our leading killer heart disease, to the extent that it's almost completely preventable. And as Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn has said, heart disease is a toothless paper tiger that need not exist. In other words, almost completely preventable. We know that by looking at populations who eat a traditional healthy diet that's mostly plant-based. There's essentially no heart disease, even in the long-lived among them. Myth number 12, coconut oil is healthy. So I didn't put a whole lot of, I'm not going to show you a lot more than this, but bottom line is coconut oil is like 92% saturated fat, and it has a little bit of medium chain fatty acids in there, which are possibly of benefit. It's far from proven, and the research, for example, that shows coconut oil lowers cholesterol, again, was a substitution effect. They took people who were eating butter and had them eat coconut oil instead, and yes, cholesterol came down a little bit, but guess what works even better? No oil at all. Really drops. You want to drop that cholesterol, then move away from all these oils, especially the hardened, the saturated ones. Okay, this is one that's really pervasive. Is people think eggs are healthy again. I thought eggs were healthy again. This is like almost universal. Everybody thinks that eggs are healthy. This is, in my opinion, it really reflects the marketing achievements of the egg industry. Eggs were never healthy. That egg yolk is pure cholesterol in a very hefty dose. And just as you can show the narrowing of the carotid plaques, that your blood vessel damage from smoking more and more cigarettes over time, you can show more and more blockage of the arteries from eating more and more egg yolks over time. So you've heard of a pack year history as a quantitation of how much cigarettes you've smoked over the years. An egg yolk year history is a quantitation of how many egg yolks you've had. And those egg yolks cause narrowing and clogging of those arteries. They cause strokes, they cause heart attacks, they correlate with dementia. There's all sorts of bad things about eggs. And then if that wasn't enough, the big meta-analysis that was done recently, published in JAMA, found that for each additional half of an egg consumed per day, there was a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease by an extra 6%. So if you had one whole egg, that would have been a 12% increase, and so on. And also an increase in all-cause mortality of 8%. So like if you had a whole egg a day, that would be like 16% higher death rate. So something that increases your death rate cannot be considered healthy again, in my opinion. Call me crazy.
Dave, what
There's
about egg whites?
Yeah, egg whites.
Well, we don't have that many of those studies about egg whites. So you could argue that, yes, I'm getting away from the egg yolk and the egg white's going to be healthier. There's a couple issues in theory with egg whites. One is that it's animal protein, and so it has a mix of amino acids which tend to be less healthy. But I beyond that, I'm going to say that I don't think we have enough evidence to make a conclusion about egg whites. Thanks for jumping on that one, though. But then I would ask, why are you having the egg whites? Like, what do you need them for? You need trying to get extra protein, but if you're going to try to get something extra, get some extra fiber, I would suggest. Myth number 14, red wine is healthy. Again, controversy. For some people, that red wine could be healthy. Actually, if you eat a diet that's so devoid of antioxidants, then that red wine and that little bit of grape that got through the whole processing process of creating wine is actually going to end up being a significant amount of your daily antioxidant intake. And we think that might be underlying much of the benefit, purported benefits of wine. But I think when you look with a jaundiced eye, if you will, at the research on red wine and try to pick apart the exuberance from the real evidence, I think that you find that all forms of alcohol are highly suspect. There is no amount of alcohol that doesn't increase breast cancer, for example. Like, in other words, there's no threshold. It's like, I'm safe if I drink less than half a glass a day. No, we can measure higher rates of breast cancer among people who drink a quarter glass a day than people who drink no wine. So that would be one example. And the heart disease benefit is highly questionable. Again, all these things, you can go on nutritionfacts.org, or you can search around on the broader web. The broader web, look on PubMed and see what you find there. Marijuana has health benefits. A lot of people believe this whole concept of medical marijuana suggests that it has health benefits. But I say, where is the evidence that it has health benefits? Where's the evidence it does a single thing beneficial for you? One thing is very clear: if you have any degree of mental health issues, marijuana makes it worse. It is an intoxicant. It is intoxicating. You could say, well, that's what I'm going for, and that's fine. Just let's be honest, we're not doing it for health reasons. Myth number 16, to prevent pandemics, our priority is to stop the exotic animal trade and or nefarious Chinese labs. Again, we're going for controversy. Hey, maybe it is. Maybe we'll turn out that it was intentionally released by some Chinese lab. I personally would be surprised, but it is possible. There's some very credible authorities who are investigating that. The exotic animal trade was certainly probably part of our current pandemic, but in my opinion, I think if we were to pick a most likely next pandemic, it's going to be influenza. And influenza comes from chickens, comes from ducks actually originally, and gets passed through chickens to human beings, which is exactly what happened in 1918 when the world suffered a much worse pandemic, at least from a pathogenicity standpoint. The swine, so-called Spanish flu of 1918. But these animals are the perfect host for breeding a pathogen that will be suitable for humans. They have lungs that look biochemically quite a bit like our own, so it's a perfect stepping stone. What's more, we've been creating billions and billions of these animals. We slaughter 70 billion a year. The CDC website is tracking these 19 deadly strains, which are out there. None of them has caught on enough. None of them has made the jump to human spread. I shouldn't say none of them, H1N1 perhaps. To my knowledge, none of them is doing the human to human spread, at least avidly enough to cause a pandemic. But some of these strains have literally a 50%, 60% mortality rate. So you look at COVID-19, which is somewhere from 0.5% to like 1% mortality rate. But this is like potentially much more lethal, influenza. When you have an outbreak, this is what it looks like, cleaning up the dead birds and wearing all the suits. But these animals are beak to beak. I mean, if we wanted to try to breed deadly illness, you couldn't do a better job than what we're doing. The packing in the course of a year, 70 billion chickens worldwide into these close quarters where they're living in each other's excrement, breathing each other's air. And so when you're handling these things in the lab, this is the suit you wear, right? This is like class 4 biosecurity. This is what we wear when we're farming these animals in the real world. So we don't have, in the real world, there just is no biosecurity. So it's just a matter of time. A lot of people think it's just a matter of time. And so the public health department has been trying to shout this from the rooftops for years and years. So you've been warned that avian flu is likely to be our next pandemic, or at least in the lifetimes of many of us. All right, well, that was a heady one, wasn't it? That was kind of a weighty subject and highly controversial. I certainly welcome debate and counter other ideas that you might have. So here we are touching on another one, which is Americans are all pitching in to help the climate crisis. Atta boy, atta girl, let's pat each other on the back. We're all working hard. We're recycling, right? Well, I don't know about that. I'm going to argue that most of us probably don't know a single person who has really done much of any substance to reduce our carbon footprint or to try to mitigate the climate disaster, as it's being called, the climate emergency. So a good film, it's a little bit of an oldie at this point, Cowspiracy, talks about the huge role, the outsized role that cattle play. Cattle are the real hogs. Cattle are arguably, according to some credible research, and you can debate all these figures, but nobody's debating it's very big. Like as much as 91% of Amazon destruction is to make room for cattle or cattle feed. You've got the amount of water that goes into cattle and beef production is just unbelievable. It's like 2,000 to 3,000 gallons per pound. They're, depending on how you do the accounting, as much as 51% of global greenhouse gas emissions are due to livestock. If you account for the long-term effects of burning of rainforest, and you also include the animal respiration, the amount of waste that an animal creates in a day is like your body weight, like literally. I mean, it's just amazing how much cattle, the resources they use. To quantitate the relative importance of different interventions we can do to mitigate the climate emergency, you've got this neat project called Drawdown. It's a very scientific group who does their very best to sort of estimate the individual contribution of every little thing. And it turns out if you kind of rate things, sort of rank list the most impactful to the least impactful, we find that a plant-rich diet is very near the top, way above things like photovoltaic, solar generation, or nuclear power, or electric cars, or name almost anything you can name. Plant-rich diets, and of course tropical rainforest restoration. So protecting those rainforests is up there too. So if you lump those two together, you get something that looks like the biggest intervention we can do. So here is a 90-second video. I will show you this one. So I said that most of us don't know anyone who's really done much more than lift a finger to mitigate the issue of the climate emergency. And I would argue that eating a plant-rich diet for the rest of your life would be a very significant step that you could take and that you could share with others to try to reduce our footprint. Moving on to an entirely different, entirely equally controversial topic. The best way to prevent cancer is to get screened. So this young lady comes to you worried about, let's say, breast cancer. And as a doctor, what are you going to do? Well, it turns out there's a lot of research on what we can do. So the main medical answer to breast cancer is mammography. So the strategy is, let's wait till you get breast cancer. Let's hope we can catch it with a mammogram and before it spreads, and then resect it, right? So there's been a lot of research, well, at what age and how effective, and it turns out that the best published research from a great book, Overdiagnosed or Less Medicine, More Health, in this field of healthcare delivery science, Dr. Gilbert Welch and his colleagues have published a lot of research here. And what they find just pictorially is, for if you look at 1,000 women, you screen them for 10 years, you're women age 50 and up, you're going to have about half of them get a false alarm. You're potentially going to save anywhere from 0.3 to 3.2 of them the horrible consequence of dying from breast cancer. And that sounds like a big win, but it comes at the cost of the false positives, the fact that you're needlessly treating a bunch of people for breast cancer who were never going to die from it or even know necessarily that they had it. They're going to call themselves breast cancer survivors for the rest of their lives and credit that mammogram with saving their life. 6 are going to die from breast cancer anyway. So you've saved a couple lives at the cost of a whole lot of radiation to all these women. And you haven't improved overall mortality. So all-cause mortality has not ever been demonstrated by mammography to be benefited. So you say, well, wait a minute, is there something better we could do? Well, so I'm not saying don't get your mammogram. I'm not going to say that. I'm really not going to imply it either, because I think the mammogram can help. But I'm just saying, let's not say that we've completely checked that box. If you really want to prevent breast cancer, then let's prevent it in the first place. And let's go with the American Institute of Cancer Research and their science-based guidelines on how to prevent cancer in general. And this has been put to the test for breast cancer in particular, but it really amounts to the same message that we've been preaching in this Health Challenge Delaware. It's the healthy diet, that whole food plant-based diet checks like 7 of these 10 boxes. It's avoiding that alcohol, as we talked about. It's being physically active. It turns out physical activity is good for cancer. And we had a question.
Yeah, so what are you saying? Do not get mammograms?
No, not saying that. So don't take that as a don't get mammogram. It's go ahead and get your mammograms. Ask the hard questions. How beneficial is this for me? Because there is a little latitude, like the guidelines are to get a mammogram every 1 to 2 years for a lot of people. And the guidelines and the evidence that mammograms are beneficial in your 40s is highly suspect. Really a sober analysis of that, really, if there's a benefit, it's very, very, very slight in the 40s. As we get older, breast cancer gets more common, it gets more beneficial to get that mammogram. But what was the other point I was going to make? Breast cancer. I mean, so the behavioral stuff is, the point is that we want to do this in parallel. You want to lead these healthy lifestyle factors. And so, for example, this study put those very recommendations to the test as far as looking at a population over time. And they found that breast cancer risk was reduced by 60% in women who met at least 5 of those recommendations, those 10 recommendations, as opposed to those who met none. So if you're smoking and you're overweight, you're leading a very unhealthy lifestyle, you can reduce your risk of breast cancer by as much as 60%. Okay, here's another one. This one's a little less controversial because the science is so strong. Avoid soy. So many people avoiding soy, but all the evidence says soy is just like beneficial. I mean, like there's not really hardly any evidence that soy is actually harmful. Everybody's afraid of it because it has what's called phytoestrogens, but those phytoestrogens really are estrogen blockers. And bottom line, when you consume soy, it reduces your circulating estrogen levels. When you're consuming dairy, it raises your estrogen levels. Even meat raises your estrogen levels. So if you want to reduce breast cancer risk and mortality, soy reduces it. A lot of women avoid it because they're afraid of breast cancer. It's the opposite is the case. Same with prostate cancer. As far as chronic kidney disease, soy would be a much better choice than animal products. And among the different milks, not that you have to consume a milk because it's a processed food, but if you want to consume a milk, soy milk appears to be the healthiest among the plant-based milks. But it's kind of disappearing because everybody's trying to avoid soy, and oat milk is all the fad. And finally, myth number 20, and I'm sorry we're going over a little bit. Nutrition is not that important, everything in moderation. So everything in moderation is something that we hear a lot, and it's a frustration for us because everything in moderation is like saying, oh, I'm just going to throw up my hands and you know, it doesn't matter anyway, but it does matter. We got study after study after study with nutrition only interventions showing, my gosh, this stuff really works. That you can get dramatic effects to mental health and cardiovascular health and body weight when you switch to a more plant-based diet.
There's a question, Dr. Donahue, about
Yes.
almond milk.
What about it?
What about almond milk?
It's fine. I recommend go with the lower calorie. Whenever you're doing a milk, try to get away from the sugar. So the 30 calorie almond milk is very low cal. That might be a really good choice if you're trying to minimize your calorie intake. And I'm going to stop there and take any other questions.
There was a question earlier in regards to the omega.
Yes.
How are these supplements regulated? What is the oversight mechanism that ensures consumers that they are getting what they think?
That's a great question. The answer is not very well. They're not regulated hardly nearly enough. And it's a big problem. The Food and Drug Administration is almost powerless at the hands of the supplement manufacturers. There's no process to actually analyze these things, which is why you really want to rely on an independent laboratory if such a thing were to exist. And I'm happy to say that there are at least one. I think there's a couple of these independent laboratories, but consumerlab.com has been around for a very long time. I have a subscription to it. I pay for a license to that. And I looked up omega-3 supplements, and the one that I shared with you, the Diva brand, got their nod of approval. It was free of contaminants. It had the amount of omega-3 that it said it did on the label. And so we have at least that bit of evidence. It's a good choice.
I looked up a tablespoon of flaxseed is 7,000 milligrams.
Of omega-3.
Yep.
Now it's all the ALA, and the question is how much of that is going to end up getting converted to DHA and
Oh,
EPA.
that's more complex.
What?
That's more complex. Okay.
So yeah, you're getting the ALA, but you need the DHA, especially. That's the one that seems to have a lot of the benefits for the brain. And DHA and EPA together had the benefits for longevity that we saw, where omega-3 was akin to low omega-3 was akin to smoking. I don't want to oversell the omega-3, but it is very commonly low, even in people who, like myself, who are eating a very healthy diet. So,
Preston has a question. He has his hand raised.
yes, please. Preston, can you unmute yourself? So I think, let's see. We are going to jump over to our, Preston, we can get to your question later. You could type it in the chat. Typing stuff in the chat is a great way to get it read. Alex has been great about reading that stuff out loud. So put your questions in the chat if you have them. Absolutely. What I'm going to suggest is we now jump over to our breakout rooms. We'll give you a half hour, so that'll take us all the way up to 7:57, 3 minutes before the end of the hour. So feel free to jump into your rooms. They should be all open. What I'll do is, if you're a mentor, go in the room that has your name. And if you are not a mentor, jump into the room of the name of your mentor.
Dr.
Okay,
Donahue, we have
Yeah.
another question. What do you think
Yeah.
about oat milk?
oat milk seems to be just fine. It doesn't seem to have some of the health benefits that soy milk has. Cholesterol lowering, often rich in calcium. It depends on the oat milk. It's not as rich in protein. And it doesn't seem to have the beneficial effects for prostate cancer, breast cancer that soy milk has. All right, guys, feel free to jump in your rooms. Can you see them? You go down to the bottom of your screen and look at that breakout rooms. And you should be able to
Beth
jump in.
Stevenson, you'll be, so Beth Stevenson, this is her first time, so she needs to be added to a group.
I don't see
Yeah.
my name. I don't see my name on the choices.
Let me